Hello again. There was a discovery that probably went around, you probably saw it on the internet, about something they found on Mars. And I sort of took it to its conclusion and said, I think they're going to have a really tough time in the future denying what they find. They just have to find the right thing. Extraterrestrial life, denying it, it's inevitable. You can deny it as much as you want. So here's what they found. The Mars Perseverance rover last year took some images of a particular pattern. Now it's a very small area. It's, like a foot by foot, very small area of a interesting patterned colored stone surface. And then they started looking at it and said, oh, it's got differentiation. The sort of brownish orange, that's your typical iron rusty surface of Mars, but it's these light and this kind of bluish color. The mix of those three things, iron and then the blue and then the whitish, that's something that geologists are aware of on Earth. So they started investigating it with the instruments they had available on Perseverance. And they nicknamed these things the general bluish spots that are just called leopard spots. And then the individual little blue, dark blue things they're calling poppy seeds. I don't know that they're poppy seeds, but and I don't know that there's any leopards on Mars, but that's what they just call them that. But they did some chemical analysis by way of, and we'll get to how that's done. They found carbon, sulfur, iron, and phosphorus. Now, when you make these things available on Earth, they are energy sources that biological life can use. They can consume it, and then they can spit out basically bacteria poop. And that's what they've actually discovered. In the mix between the blue and the white, they've discovered the signatures, the chemistry that we would normally see as resulting from life on Earth, oxidization by life of iron-containing compounds. They know this is in a riverbed on Mars. There's no river there anymore; it's all dried up. But that's what it's all about. This is what they found, and then we go on to what all about it. How did they find this? Well, they saw the colorful spots and said, "Let's put our instruments to it." On the head of the arm that's on Perseverance, they can move the arm over an area. They can then illuminate the area with high energy photons, X-rays, UV. They can shine these intense energy sources onto it. And then based upon the light that they get back, either fluorescence or absorbing, they can tell what kind of compounds are in the material. So they shine the high energy illumination, UV, X-ray, onto something, and then they shine broad spectrum light, basically really white light, onto that surface, and they can tell from what colors they see, not truly spectrographic analysis, spectroscopic. They can tell from the colors what the material is in the thing that they've illuminated. And that's how they did it. So they found out what the compounds are. And based upon what colors they're seeing, what was fluorescing, and what was being absorbed, and by the brightness of it, they can tell what compounds are there in what concentrations. Down at the bottom, the one that says PIXL map, pixel map, you see Fe, which is iron, Si, which is silicon, and Ca, which is calcium. So in the control sample, you can see that it can detect different materials based upon the color after it was illuminated with a high energy source. So they took this area on Mars, they illuminated it, they shined the light on it, they took pictures of it, and they determined what compounds that they saw. They said, well, this is on Earth typically something that biology creates. Some bacteria will consume these compounds and then will produce other compounds. And that's what we're seeing is it's life, not sentient, not people, not Martians. It's just, maybe some kind of bacteria. But on Earth, that would be a confirmed indication of a biologic process, the iron reduction or the redux of iron. But now they're saying, well, it could be non-biological, could be a chemical process, but you need a lot of heat for a long period of time. And the thing that you're heating up would need to be very acidic. It would have to have a high pH. And that way you could produce these materials. But if you had that level, it would produce it in high quantities, not these little small amounts of leopard spots. If you wanted an analogy, let's say you were making something on the stove, and the thing you were making was a very hot sauce, lots of jalapeno in it, hot sauce, and you were going to heat it up, but you went away and talked on the phone or watched a TV program, and you had it on high heat. You came back afterwards, and all the water had boiled off, and your somewhat acidic hot sauce, because all the water's gone, has now become very acidic, and you find it has ruined your saucepan because your saucepan was made out of something that doesn't do too well in high acid or high heat. So on Mars, if you had high heat and you had high acidity, you could produce these compounds as a natural chemical process, not involving biology. But you'd need the high heat for a long period of time, and you'd need the high acidity. There's a way of doing it, right? We don't have any evidence of long duration high heat that would produce these chemicals. And in the soil at the moment, we don't have any indication that it's ever been subjected to high acidity. Maybe it is a biologic process, and maybe the water was not boiled off, but evaporated. Because remember, the air pressure on Mars is far lower than it is on Earth. So water would have a tendency to just come off in vapor and it's gone, no more water. And it wouldn't be very acidic because it's the wrong chemistry. And you would need lower temperature, even in the absence of water, and lower acidity so that life, biologic life, bacteria, could do this thing where they could absorb the energy from the iron and the phosphorus and the carbon and then produce these compounds. You need a more habitable environment than the non-biologic process would allow. But maybe it's more recent than we think. Mars Orbiter has actually found what they are initially referred to as rivulets, which are evidence of, because Mars has seasons, during the warmer months, these dark stains come out of the edge of craters. So if you think of a crater as it's multiple layers of soil, and then a rock hits it and it blows out, and therefore along the side walls of the craters, you have different layers. And if in one of those layers there happens to be moisture, there happens to be an aquifer, then when it was the warmer months, it would leak out and it would mix with the soil. And because there's mostly iron, it would make a darker staining on the soil. They have discovered that there are large pockets of liquid water below the surface of Mars. And if you have a crater that blew out a chunk of Mars and it went down into the layers, you would have access to this liquid water, but only during the parts of the year when it wasn't frozen solid in the rock. Here you have access to liquid water some parts of the year. You have the lower temperatures, so it's more conducive to a biologic process than the ultra high temperatures that would bake it all off. Maybe it's more recent than they think. But there is a non-biologic postulation that requires high heat and maybe some acid, and that is meteor impacts. There is evidence of volcanic activity a long time ago. If you think of Olympus Mons on Mars, if you have an impact and you have lava beneath the surface and you have that come up to the surface, it would be enough to melt rock. It would take time to cool, and the rock could contain things that came up below the surface, such as all these energy-producing elements that would mix together under high heat, be very acidic, kind of like places on Earth are acidic. And there you've got your conditions for your non-biologic postulation. The majority of Mars isn't like that. It's not going to be this way. And in the particular Jezero crater that we're looking at, the dried riverbed doesn't show that it was exposed to high heat or acid. What we're seeing is evidence that it's more biologic than it is purely chemical process. But until we start looking at the actual microscopic level of these materials, we're not going to know much more. But if we did, think about it this way. That's on the surface of Mars. The surface of Mars is constantly being exposed to intense levels of ultraviolet and X-ray radiation from both the sun and deep space. So any cells that would be there from bacteria would have been ruptured by the X-ray or the UV, and you won't find any on the surface. You won't find anything. certainly no active live bacteria. But if you dig down far enough to one of these areas where the aquifer is letting water out periodically and sample that, you might find something. Right now, they're saying it can't be life. It must be a chemical process not involving life, just cause. And we've seen this denial before, like on Venus, they spotted phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus at high altitudes in quantities that would be higher than they are on Earth. And phosphine is easily basically bled off to space. So in the high altitude of Venus, if you find a lot of phosphine, more so than on Earth, you would have to have something replenishing it. And the thing that would be replenishing it would be something down on the surface of Venus. So we have these indicators, but we're going to need to spend the money to go back and look to find that out. If you're saying Earth doesn't have these, chemistry ways of finding this stuff that looks like life, actually we do. I visited Yellowstone National Park, and they have these prismatic hot springs. You walk on a boardwalk that goes around the pool because, first of all, the pool has got gaseous sulfur dioxide coming out of it, that rotten egg smell. You don't want to be downwind from it because it's actually very harmful to your respiratory system. Second thing is the water is superheated by pockets of lava deep underground. So the water is as close to boiling as you can get, maybe a little more so. And you have bubbling up through this different toxic gases. And because the material that's being superheated contains chemicals that are acidic, the pools themselves are extremely acidic. So don't go dipping your toe in one of those, and don't go walking on the rocks because the rocks are very thin and you can actually fall through them. And now you wind up in a highly acidic boiling pool of acid. People have died at Yellowstone for doing stupid things like that. But what they do find, because they run a pole out there and they take a sample along the edge, these colorful areas, and they find thriving bacteria that are doing just fine at these boiling acidic temperatures because they're actually using the chemistry and the acidic nature of it as their energy source. So they don't have to eat plants or consume animals. They're bacteria that are thriving off of the materials that they happen to find, and the temperatures are great. But let's say you have one of these pools and it completely dries up over a long period of time. The temperature is not high enough for the chemical process they're describing might have happened on Mars. Think of it more like, if it was on your hot stove, instead of it being boiling, it would be 400 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 212. So the temperatures, even from a dried up hot prismatic spring, would not be enough to get the process going that they're saying could have happened on Mars. This, I think, is we've transitioned from one stretch to another. It used to be that we'd find these indicators of life, and there would be all sorts of pushback, how they're not from biological processes, they're from normal chemical processes producing the same thing. So we've gone from, hey, we think we've detected byproducts of life or biosignatures or some such thing that is produced by life. No, it can't be that. It must be a chemical process. And now we found something that is a biological process on Earth. We don't know of any other process in the kinds of conditions we're finding on Mars that would have produced this. And now they're pulling up the chemical processes and go, no, I think there's a non-zero probability of it being a chemical process, even though the conditions aren't right on Mars. So we've gone from pushing down the biology to pulling up the chemical. Interesting transition. But how do you know for sure? Well, you need to do further analysis. The Mars Perseverance rover is dropping off little sample containers. They're sealed containers. It sort of poops them out as it drives along on Mars. It's got a limited number of them, but some of them it keeps on board. The really good ones it keeps on board, but they're just so-so samples. It kind of spits out the bottom of the rover, and the rover keeps going, and they have markers where they drop them off at. Because with shifting sands on Mars, they could come back later and visually not see them because they're buried under the sand. So they need to know where to dig for them. We need to send something back to Mars to go pick them up, either analyze them further on Mars or bring them back to Earth where we can do full analysis like we've done with asteroid samples like Bennu. Then once we've done the analysis, we can peer review the results, publish them, and just state whatever they are. They are what they are. Or once we have sufficiently advanced things to get humans on Mars, we go pick up those samples or pick up some new ones, and we analyze them with whatever tools we've brought to Mars, and then just let the chips fall where they may. But we can also grab samples when the humans are on Mars, bring the samples back to Earth with the humans, hopefully, and then we can do full analysis on Earth. But until we start doing the analysis with a broader set of instruments, it's going to be a open question. But if we do discover, hey, we've actually, by digging down, found a little trace of a layer of aquifer, and in that aquifer, we've actually found live bacteria. Then the question would be, well, did you humans bring it to Mars with you? No, because the outside of our suits are sealed from the inside, and therefore they're bathed in UV and X-ray, which would have killed any bacteria on the outside before we took the samples, and then we analyzed them in a clean lab. So no, we didn't pollute it. It actually came from that rivulet. But then that would say, you mean there can be life, bacteriological, not sentient. There can be life elsewhere in the universe? Well, that's kind of disruptive to society. It's going to inject chaos, because then the Earth is nothing special. There can be other Earth-like things out there having to deal with that. Or maybe they're just going to withhold the funding necessary to find out the actual answer until later. So we just keep kicking the proverbial can down the road until the majority notices that the emperor is walking around naked. So I think that the presence of extraterrestrial life, in whatever form we find it in, is inevitable, because the Earth itself is nothing truly special, because all the stuff we see out there is just analog to the Earth. So in summary, you can only deny the existence of extraterrestrial biological life for so long. Physics and chemistry that we're seeing out in space, the Earth is nothing unique. There are places in our solar system that can have water on them. Mars has subsurface water. There are places elsewhere in exoplanets and in nebulas outside of our solar system that we're detecting organic chemistry. We're detecting water in clouds. So planets that are terrestrial at the right distance from their host star are going to have liquid water. And on Earth, wherever we see liquid water, we find some kind of life, not human, maybe just bacteria. Maybe it's extremophiles that can live in boiling acid, but we do find things. So it's only a matter of time. But first, we have to make sure we have the funding for it. So it doesn't help that NASA zeroed out the funding for the Mars Sample Return Program and for the Venus Atmospheric Studies. But we're not the only nation on the Earth that has billions of dollars that we can contribute to science. Maybe China will pick up the gauntlet and we'll go find what we don't seem to be willing to find, if only to embarrass the U.S. And links. I even link it. This is oddball. The scientific team that originally produced this paper, they went back and updated it. And in the updated version, it was published on the journal Nature, or nature.com. And typically you have to go through a paywall and pay money, subscribe to Nature, or give them your information in order to get a copy of it. This particular article was considered so scientifically significant that Nature dropped their paywall, and you can download the PDF of the entire scientific article, not just the abstract. So that's telling. And then you have the NASA public release information on the announcement. And then if you want to know about this X-ray and UV imager PIXL aboard the Perseverance, you can find out about that. And then the Anton Petrov, Scott Manley, and StarTalk. So you can start from Anton, which asks lots of questions, And then you can go over to Scott Manley. If you want more minutia than you've heard here, Scott is really good at digging down to the actual details of the instruments, what was found, when it was found, all that kind of stuff. And then if you want the joking referring to it as maybe an indicator of life, you can go watch Neil on StarTalk. And then if you want to see about other things that I mentioned, the Grand Prismatic Hot Spring at Yellowstone, the discovery of large amounts of liquid water below the surface of Mars, and then these rivulets, they're actually called recurrent slope lineae, seasonal trickle downs coming out of layers of the sidewall of craters. And then what is this phosphene in the atmosphere of Venus of which he speaks? Okay, what have you got to say?
What do you think the scientists and general population of Earth would be if it was found out that there was live bacteria on Mars?
The first thing people would say is, sure, it's only bacteria. It's not like humans. It's not animals. It's just bacteria. The second group would say, oh, you brought that with you. That's contamination from Earth. Another group would say, like they've said in this case, that's not really a sign of life. There's all sorts of chemical processes that would explain it equally well, except the absence of those conditions, which they found in this case. I won't call them naysayers. I'll just describe it as, if you ever ask a question for which you don't want to know the answer because you suspect the answer is what you don't want to be the answer, then never ask the question, never fund the science, and you'll never have to be dealing with how will that impact society.
Feeling that the response would be, if we really discovered real bacteria on Mars, it would be, that's nice. You know, we can't do anything with it. We can't talk to it. We could grow some more of it in a lab, but otherwise there's not much value in that, is there?
Maybe there's another way to look at it. That's what I meant to say. I think the other way people is a little bit different. They would say, is it DNA-based life? Is it life like life on Earth? Yes. Because another way to look at it on Earth is to look and say, wow, from the deep sea vent to the super hot water of Yosemite to the snow leopards in Siberia, there's life in all these places. But another way to look at it is to say there's DNA-based life, and the big thing is getting life. And once you have life, evolution takes care of everything else. Natural selection and random mutation takes care of everything else.
Yeah.
So if you're looking, I don't think it's quite Tatooine yet. I think when you look at Mars, also when you look at Mars, I think Anton Petrov put it very well. He was saying, you know, what the guys at NASA are saying isn't that it isn't life-based, that they've looked at all the different possibilities they can think of, and the one apparently by far the most likely from what we know is that it's life. But 10 years ago, we thought oxygen was a surefire sign of life because oxygen would disappear and dissipate and react. And if it was in the atmosphere, it had to be life. And now we know there's dark oxygen. So I'm not saying that it wasn't life, but I still think the right formulation is to say, from what we know now, and what we know, it would be life that created it. But I wouldn't go further to say that it's life.
And that's, as you pointed out, Anton had one take on it, which was, of all the processes they've looked at, the one most likely, given the conditions on Mars, is a biologic process. And when you watch the StarTalk video, Neil had kind of the opposite take of basically you're being confused by it being life. And the astrobiologist, which he had on as his guest, goes, no, we've looked at all the other ways that this could occur. And given the conditions on Mars, biology is the only one left. Basically, people not wanting to realize that the answer is something that, no, it can't possibly happen. An example from science fiction literature would be, yes, Luke, I am your father, no matter what you think. You know, same sort of thing is, but I do agree with you. It's more than just do we see little things moving around in a water sample on Mars? That's not the significant thing. The significant thing is crack open those little wiggly things and see if they have mitochondrial DNA inside them, and then determine from the structure of the mitochondrial DNA who's their mother and how old is she.
Yeah.
That's ultimately going to be it. But the first hurdle we have to cross is, okay, let's everybody face the same direction and realize that moving bacteria around on a slide is bacteria. And then we can decide how old is it and where did it come from?
I was watching a movie today on TV. It's about a spaceship that landed on some planet. And they got out there and they were looking around. There's trees and weeds and grass. And the guy's looking through his binoculars and says, there's no sign of life here.
There are no 6 foot tall sentient human beings that speak English and have a pale skin color, so there's no life. So I think the naysayer is probably too obvious a way of describing it. I think that whatever they find, no matter how hard they try and screen it to make sure it's biologic and nothing other than biologic, there are no known chemical processes that could occur given the current conditions, then they'll just go, no, I didn't hear what you said. Or, okay, so we found life on Mars. Big deal. How is that going to help the starving people of the planet?
Okay, that's what they're going to ask.
Yeah. And they used to ask that question every time NASA's budget came up. How's that going to help the starving people of this planet? It doesn't need to, because we should have enough money for both. We can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. Although nowadays, I'm not sure. Until we send people to Mars and they dig down through the layers of the sidewall of a crater into the wet portion during the warmer months, and then they take that liquid from 6 feet into the sidewall and they pull out a sample and they run it through the microscope and they find bacteria or tardigrades or anything alive, it's going to be hard to dispel anything they find that's actually moving as other than life. But no, it's not sentient humanoid English speaking, therefore it's not actually life.
They might have an accent.
Yeah, it might have an accent.
I wonder what the Martian accent is.
Remember, the national language of the United States is English, except for the people that live in Puerto Rico and some islands out in the Pacific.
And Brooklyn.
Hey, I'm walking here.
Hey. And Italians who talk with their hands.
Well, so do deaf people.
Oh, yeah.
The mechanism by which you communicate is not necessarily an indication of intelligence.
Well, even if let's say we find that there is no life on Mars, wouldn't we still go and explore it and set up colonies?
Yes.
I agree. I think we would. And the moon, too. We don't have life on it to go around there and see what there is.
All you've got to do is have a rare compound, and we're going to find a way to go there and mine it and bring it back.
Yeah, send the Nostromo.
Well, here's the thing. If you look at that same approach on Earth and you said, well, companies just, they'll go find uranium and they'll produce plutonium from that, and they're doing that on their own, they're a business, except for the governmental subsidies by which they create the factory necessary to do it. That place in Tennessee didn't build it by itself. They provide the funding for the employees to operate it. And then once you have it, they can sell it for a large chunk of money, and the subsidies don't get repaid. And then when the fuel has been spent, we need some way of disposing it. So we get a subsidy and the government goes in and builds storage caves and salt mines that we're going to leave it there for, tens of thousands of years. And who's going to fund the monitoring of that? Certainly not those corporations. Whenever you find something that's of supposed value, look closely as to where the funding came from to create the product that is sellable. And then when you're done, who's paying for the cleanup? More often than not, it's not a corporation doing it all itself. I mean, even SpaceX, they can only fund Starlink's initial launches because they had government contracts for launching other things. Always scratch below the surface when you're looking at business models.
Yeah, it occurred to me that crazy old movie I was watching today, They said, hey, look what's in the caves here in this planet. It's full of gold, lots and lots of gold. Well, what are they going to do with it? Dig it out and send it back to Earth? It's heavy stuff.
Yes. Well, that's part of the issue. You've probably heard of asteroid mining before, and there are a lot of companies chomping at the bit to do asteroid mining because they found huge quantities of gold, silver, and platinum in certain asteroids. Trillions of dollars.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
But who's going to pay the money to build the rockets necessary to get us there, the mining equipment, the whole new mining technology to mine it, and then who's going to pay for the rockets to get all that heavy cargo and land it safely back on Earth? And then they'll take it from there and they'll like refine it and mine it and produce the end products and then sell it to business. And then what happens to all the companies that make a high profit living off of selling valuable materials like gold, silver, and platinum when you're going to be dumping tons of the stuff on the open market? Well, that's going to fall through. So when they started analyzing it, there are still people that talk about asteroid mining, but the big corporations don't talk about it anymore because it would dilute the money that they would make off of it. They like to keep it scarce, kind of like De Beer and diamonds.
Yeah, the diamond. Yeah.
Yeah. You can make artificial diamonds just fine at a much reduced cost than mining them. But how come we don't see any like 20 karat diamonds for, cheap? That's because then De Beer's market would fall apart. Where do you see them? There's an advertisement on TV showing a woman's necklace with eighth of a carat diamonds, just an entire string of eighth of a carat diamonds.
I think someday
nice.
We may evolve to not want jewelry anymore. Rings, jewelry.
I don't wear. I wear a watch when I'm out in public, but when I'm
it may be the general culture will give up on wearing jewelry.
Well, it's hard to get rid of because it's passed down as a practice from generation to generation, and then you go and get married, and you got to wear the rings, and
I don't know. We all used to wear hats a while back. Now nobody wears hats.
Hey! I've got hats in my living room. When I go out in the hot sun, I wear hats.
Okay.
I like bling.
See, some people like bling,
but I bet you it's going to go out of fashion someday.
Hey, at one time in the past, spurs that jingle, jingle, jingle.
Yeah, and bones in their noses and all kinds of stuff.
Well, I've seen some people lately that put things in their noses.
Ears and things on their necks
and pins and
all kinds of stuff
through the cheeks.
So I think we're evolving away from that.
Oh, I don't
think so. I don't think so. I think there'll always be a niche market for that.
Yes, I think it'll rotate. Yeah. Then as fashion, it'll go out of fashion, it'll come back, it'll go out. But I like bling.
Everything is old. Everything that's old is new again.
Some of the stuff I can see would be valuable, like these watches that can tell you all kinds of things, emergency switches on that you wear. I can see the value of some of these things, but just to have a rare stone in a chain around your neck, I'm not.
Well, see, most people think of a rare stone as being like their birthstone or something. Helen walks around with a Martian meteorite on her neck.
That I can see that. Yeah,
because that's rarer than anything anybody else could go buy in a jewelry store.
That would be something. Yeah. I had an aunt once who had a piece of a meteor or something, and I just love to visit her and just look at it. Yeah.
I have one of those fly speck ones. Looks like fly poop, little tiny thing.
But usually people wear whatever jewelry they have has some meaning to them. I mean, the jewelry I wear has a lot of meaning to me.
Yeah.
Nostalgic.
Well, at one time I wore my high school graduation ring, and then I wore my college graduation ring, and then I realized, why am I wearing this? At one time when I was, I guess probably middle school, I had a bracelet that I wore that said penicillin allergy on it, and it was made out of stainless steel, so it wouldn't corrode or stain my arm. And then last year I went and did the test and realized at my current age I am no longer allergic to penicillin, so I don't need to wear the bracelet anymore.
Outgrew it. Outgrew the bracelet.
I outgrew the allergy to penicillin. Now, some people, if they're exposed to the right stuff, they can grow an allergy to nuts, to like peanuts.
Gee,
It's
I don't know.
biology. Okay, anything else before I stop recording? You hearing nothing? I stop recording.